We are about to hear from two Chalcedonian Orthodox Christians, but what we are talking about is the schism and the potential for the restored communion between Eastern and Oriental Christians, which is such a vital topic. And it's an example of historical and theological study that has profound relevance and resonance for Christians on the ground, where they are. If one thinks of the Middle East today, talk about an area riven by conflict, this is one of the places geographically where Eastern and Oriental Christians live side by side with one another. They can't afford to be disunited. Eastern and Oriental Orthodox are side by side also at St. Vladimir Seminary. Our faculty, staff, student body, and trustees feature members of both. A substantial proportion of our student body is from among the Oriental families. And for those of you who don't know, these include the Armenian, Ethiopian, Eritrean, Coptic, Syriac, and Malankara Indian churches related to the Syriac Orthodox Church. So this is a diverse but also unified family of churches. And Dr. Perczel and I will be talking about the historical dimensions of the schism. But just one last word as to your support of all this. I think today is a day where you're coming to know more and more what seminary it is that you're supporting. And now I realize in the case of Eastern and Oriental schism and unity, this is a controversial topic. And there are voices that are profoundly unsympathetic to the dialogue and to the possibility of restored communion. I can only respect this as a place of caution. Often it's a place of fear. Often it's a place of visceral distaste for the other. And we have to recognize that. But it has to be met with serious theological and historical study and dialogue, knowing that that historical study and dialogue has, again, profound repercussions for life of Christians in the world today and life for a common Orthodox witness to the world. I will leave it there. I could say more about fundraising. I could say more about tote bags and mugs. They're there. A link has just gone up again in the chat to help you contribute to our seminary. Please, during this hour, consider doing so as generously as you possibly can. I have now, once again, every time I say it, I mean it, the privilege of introducing another cherished colleague, Dr. Istvan Perczel, professor in the Department of Medieval Studies at Central European University in Vienna, from where he joins us today. He is also Mar Chrysostom Chair Professor at Mahatma Gandhi University in Kottayam, Kerala, India. He has worked extensively on late antique and patristic philosophy. One of his research projects is on Christian Platonism and Byzantine theology, within which he has published many studies on St. Anthony Evagrius of Pontus, Pseudo-Dionysius the Areopagite, one of my favorites, the 6th century Origenist movement, Maximus the Confessor, Simeon the New Theologian, John Italos, Ioan Petrizi, and he's translated numerous philosophical and patristic works into Hungarian. Thanks be to God for your work, Professor. He's also worked on Syriac Christianity, including the Syriac Christians of India. Dr. Peter Bouteneff is entering his 25th year of teaching at St. Vladimir's Seminary, with which he has been involved most of his life. He has studied patristics and dogmatics years ago in Oxford and has brought that into the service of his work at St. Vladimir's. He's published books in the sacred arts as well as in patristic theology. And I have just spent a year on sabbatical working on a book on the schism and rapprochement between Chalcedonian and non-Chalcedonian Christians, a book which I rely on your prayers to complete in the coming months and submit for publication. Dr. Perczel is particularly adept and interested in church history, but naturally is deeply interested in theology. This configuration is sort of the opposite for me. I'm primarily interested in theology, but especially through writing this book, I have immersed myself into church history and have reviewed what we call the classic conciliar period between the 4th and the 8th centuries. With this, let me welcome Istvan. Would you have any words to say at the outset of our conversation, to which I look forward very, very much?
Yes, thank you so much. As usual, you have praised me beyond my merits. You mentioned that I did research in India among the Christians, not only the Orthodox Christians, who are, of course, Oriental Orthodox, but also very much among the Church of the East, a small community belonging to the Church of the East, and also among the Catholics, because what I see in India, and this is very important, it's one community. Whatever the schisms, whatever the historical oppositions, whatever the present enmities between those communities, this is one community. And perhaps we can start, when we discuss this question, with stating that at least the Oriental and the Eastern Orthodox, I would go even further, are one community. We don't have to create this unity. We are bound with 1,000 links, but this is one thing, and this should inspire our love and respect for each other. Now, how to create a unified church through dialogue, that's another issue, and I must admit that I am very skeptical. I am not even sure that it would be necessary. And if we look at our relationship to God, the fathers, both Eastern Orthodox and Oriental Orthodox, have spoken about several degrees leading to the union with God. And first, one begins by fear, as a servant who is afraid of his or her master. Then one can proceed to the degree of hired worker, and then one is working for a wage. But when one proceeds to a higher stage, one becomes a son or a daughter, and this is the stage of love. Knowledge and also union comes after that. So I think that we should cast away fear. We should not think too much about the wages, and we should practice love to each other. I think at this stage, that will be sufficient. So that would be my introduction.
It's inspiring. It helps give us perspective. Perhaps some of us are, maybe what I hear you saying is perhaps some of us are too fixated on ecclesiastical union, and that the most elemental and important union is the union in the heart and the union of love. I appreciate you said we don't have to create this. It's there and we have to simply recognize it. And yet, what I would say as a partial response to that is that ecclesiastical union matters. At St. Vladimir Seminary, I mentioned already, we have students, as you know, you were with us all year. We have students from both families, and when we celebrate the Divine Liturgy in the main chapel in the Eastern Orthodox Church, and our Oriental students and friends and brothers and sisters are in the back and are not able to receive communion. And we just look at them as we return from the communion line, and it is a pain. It's a pain that I think on some level is a pain that we have to allow ourselves to feel and never to become complacent about it. I also feel that however skeptical we may be that communion will be restored in our lifetime, we have to be doing the work to be making it happen. We have to be doing that work. As the saying goes, you're not expected to complete the task, but you are neither permitted to lay it down. You have to be doing the work. And I think that's where in your work and in mine, and we're not just simply like rushing into union, we are responsibly exploring the issues that have divided us and and that which unites us, because that's what we are tasked to do.
Can I expand upon what I have said? Why I consider love much more important than union, and why I consider union a secondary issue. Because of my experiences. I spent 1 year in Jerusalem. I was invited by a wonderful research group at the Hebrew University Institute for Advanced Studies. And of course, it was a wonderful opportunity for me to go to visit Christian communities. I was especially in good relationship with the Syrian Orthodox community, where I updated my deficient knowledge of Syriac. I had a wonderful teacher, Abuna Moshe Cicek, and I had never dared to teach Syriac before that, but being educated by Abuna Moshe Cicek, I acquired the security to try and teach Syriac, which I taught for 13 years at Central European University after that. But I was also, and my family as well, visiting many times the Church of the Holy Resurrection, the Church of the Holy Spirit. Now, what I saw there as relationship between the diverse Christian communities, that was a shame.
Yes.
We, not only I, my children, my wife, we had so many atrocious experiences about how one community deals with the other. But I must say that, and this is a very human thing, the Orthodox, the Byzantine Orthodox, that is us, were behaving in the worst manner among all of them. Why? Because the the Byzantine Orthodox have the privileges, which they inherited from the Ottoman rule, and which the Israeli state has endorsed. So they have the priority and everything that makes them so proud and puffed up and so contemptuous of the other communities. And here, I think we can rejoin to the original subject of our conversation, history. Because what I have seen is also that they are utterly ignorant of the historical circumstances of how the schisms occurred. For example, there was I saw in how much hatred the Greek Orthodox, especially monks and nuns, are behaving toward the Ethiopian community, because the Ethiopians have no privileges at all. So they always come last. And when they dared to come on at Epiphany to the Jordan, they were and they wanted to see the place where the waters were blessed. There was a nun who dragged down the Ethiopian ladies from the fence, saying, "You have no right here." And I told her, "What are you doing?
Yeah.
Why are you doing that?" And she said, "Don't you know that these are heretics? And they are stabbing us in the back, and they want to take our privileges." And I said, "How do you know that they are heretics?" Because their skin is black. How do you know they are not Orthodox? But she said, "You don't understand anything. I don't converse with you." And so I failed to explain to her that the Ethiopian church became Miaphysite at the beginning of the 6th century. Why? Because there was a strong alliance also for the Trans-Arabian Sea trade between the Roman Empire at that time, we can call it Byzantium, and the Ethiopian kingdom. And it was in the time of Emperor Anastasius that they sent an envoy to Alexandria, in fact, to Constantinople, I don't know exactly, to send them a bishop. And Anastasius was Miaphysite. It's not true that after Chalcedon, the Church of the Empire was Chalcedonian. There were all kinds of things, changes, and although Anastasius was not explicitly Miaphysite, he adhered to the Henoticon that the Miaphysites were happy to accept. And the only bishops who were exiled were the Chalcedonian bishops, the Chalcedonian patriarchs of Constantinople. And because it happened so historically, so the Ethiopian church became Miaphysite because it was converted so by the Byzantine church. So why are we hating them? This is why I say, let us love each other first.
Yeah, the priority of love is an antidote to this kind of territorialism, tribalism, and even racism in what you're just now describing from this Ethiopian woman. Love is the antidote, as well as what you're saying as well, which is actual historical perspective. It's only these things that can wake us out of this terribly human, fallen tendency to hate the other. to hate what is not familiar, to hate what does not look like me.
So perhaps so it's a very nice note, and I'm very optimistic about the role of knowledge, even scholarship. If we understand the circumstances, how things have come about, and if you understand the how coincidental so many things were that we consider structural,
Yes.
perhaps we will understand better. But this is not about the theology. The theological issues are another thing, more complicated. So it's much, much easier to clarify the historical circumstances of the schism, rather the schisms, and understand the how much of a human story this is, and not a divine story. The divine story is about unity. The story about the splits is always a human story. So when we understand this, then we will understand each other better. But will this lead us to a unified confession, church unity, communion in the Eucharist? Here are my doubts.
You know, Istvan, that's not our business. Will it lead? You know, it's like saying, is it worth preaching the word if somebody doesn't convert to the church? You just preach. You just preach and you just do the work. And then the actual healing is the work of God, and it has to penetrate all of our hearts. As to the priority of love, amen and absolutely. But I would say, you know, both you and I are married. I've been married 30 years, but if I were in my 20s and my wife were still my fiance, and if I just told her, you know, Pat, it's enough that we love each other. We don't actually have to get married. Love is the most important thing. Where are we? We have to work towards marriage. You know, I mean, it's a facile analogy, but it's apt. It's not enough.
I am not sure.
It's not enough.
I am not sure whether the simile is apt, because what will you do if you divorce your wife, or your wife divorces you? And after that, will you remarry, or would you be happy that you are not in a bad relationship, but in a loving relationship? And I think this is a much more precise analogy. There was a divorce, and that divorce was not an easy one. Here it's very important to know that the divorce didn't happen after Chalcedon.
No, that is important.
Chalcedon is
just to follow through with, I appreciate you've taken my analogy of a very appropriate step further. Divorces very rarely resolve into remarriage. It has happened. It's also said about the church that a schism is much easier to begin than it is to end. But there is, in history, there have been reconciliations after schisms, perhaps even more frequently on percentage than there have been remarriages after divorce. And it just feels like with the 20th century dialogue that has happened between our church families, however flawed that dialogue is, I've been studying it, and it's imperfect, but there is a real potential there. And once again, all I will say is that the work is still important, even if we shouldn't fetishize the goal of restored communion, even if we shouldn't set our, basically it's that or nothing, it's still important work. And something tells me you agree that it's important work to do, even if it's sort of preceded and nourished by a much more internal orientation.
Should we now go to the historical circumstances of the schism?
Absolutely. And, to get there, I want to invite you to a theme that I know is important to you, and that is the difference between a church that is ultimately imperial in its political dimension and a church family that is not. There was even a kind of an almost pejorative term of Melkite, directed at the Byzantine church as the imperial church. And, there are pluses and minuses to being the church of the empire and a church that is, as it were, outside of and incidental to the empire. So I invite you to take that as a springboard for your next reflection.
Then even before getting into the historical details, I think you have put your finger on a very important thing, namely that there are the theological differences between the Eastern and the Oriental churches, but there is something which I consider much more important. I'm not speaking as a theologian, I'm speaking as a historian. Interested in theology, so I am just the inverse, your inverse mirror image. I consider that historically speaking, and also from the point of view of behavior, more important than the theological differences, because these theological differences are subtle. And I wonder how many people in the two churches understand these theological differences at all. But there is a huge difference between the two families, and this is that our church, the Byzantine Slavic, and even also Romanian and Georgian Orthodox Church is a church with imperial legacy without an empire. All our theology and our theological fights happened within the Roman Empire, which was, of course, weakened, but lasted until 1453. And what characterizes the Oriental churches that at a moment they said goodbye to the empire. If you look at the Armenians, they had a kingdom, but it ended quite early with the Arab conquests. The Ethiopians had their empire, so they are a special case. But outside of, so originally in alliance with the Roman Byzantine Empire, and then after the Muslim conquest, they were on their own. But our tradition is an imperial tradition, which was renewed by the Orthodox countries, especially Russia, after the fall of Constantinople. Mm-hmm. And just remember how difficult it was for the Russian church to digest the fact that after the Bolshevik Revolution, there is no more empire. Rokor has declared that there is no Orthodox Church without a Tsar. So I think that we, so-called Eastern Orthodox, are in a difficult situation reimagining ourselves without the empire. And what I saw in Jerusalem, how we, our people, I mean, Greek prelates, Russian pilgrims, and so on, are behaving, they are still convinced that they are the imperial church with power in their hands. Now this power is given by the Israeli police and army. So look at what is happening in Russia now. How the leadership of the Russian church reimagines itself as representatives of an imperial church. So I think that for obtaining that very modest aim that I was speaking about, to behave in a loving manner instead of behaving in a, how to say, in a suprematist manner, we have to re-examine our imperial tradition. And perhaps then we could reach a stage when we say, thank God that we don't have the empire anymore.
Yes. This is a very, very profound reflection. Yeah. One would think that Christians would rather naturally think that the church that is based on the cross, which is the symbol of God's self-emptying of power. He did not count equality with God a thing to be grasped, but he emptied himself and took the form of a servant, that church would, at least theologically speaking, spiritually speaking, find it easier to empty itself of imperial presumptions. But of course, we are fallen human beings, and we fail in this kenotic direction, which is so central to Christianity.
But yeah,
go ahead.
Sorry. No, sorry.
I was
listening.
Yeah, go ahead.
No, I'm listening to you. Sorry for interrupting.
I'm sorry. I was going to slightly pivot this to say that one of the perhaps more positive elements of the imperial history of the church is that when it comes to the Eastern Orthodox Church, if we call it that, there is a powerful rubric that galvanizes our identity as one church. The autocephalous churches that constitute the Orthodox Church, the Eastern Orthodox Church, are united by their communion with each other under the first among equals, the See of Constantinople. And the Oriental churches don't have the same rubric of unity, as it were. They have become identified as a family of churches only quite recently, as the dialogue began to develop between the Eastern and Oriental churches. And there are fledgling efforts to kind of have a common face of Oriental churches in the Middle East, for example, between the Armenian Copts and Syrians. But Oriental unity is of a very different character, and it may be, if I may say, more fragile character than Eastern. And I say this bearing in mind that Eastern Orthodox unity is also fragile and that there are schisms and breaches in communion to this very day. But still, at least in ecclesiastical polity, there is one Eastern Church stemming from its imperial history. And there is a family of churches that are identified by their break from Chalcedon, which, as you've very carefully pointed out, that break happened at different points in history. You know, it was for each for their own very different reasons, began to identify as Miaphysite. So just to make that point, that the Eastern Oriental dialogue and even the Eastern Oriental schism is a schism of very diverse partners in a way.
I agree. At the same time, I think that this has to do with their non-imperial character. So these churches remained on their own, but they were unified earlier than the dialogue, and not necessarily in a good manner, because they were unified in another empire, namely the Ottoman Empire, which created ethnarchies. So the Byzantine Orthodox, Byzantino-Slavic Orthodox, were ranked together under the Patriarch of Constantinople. Why? Because the Ottoman sultans wanted to keep their hands on the neck of the main representatives of the churches. So it was good that all the heads of the churches are in Constantinople, Constantinia at that time. And also the Miaphysite churches were united under the Armenian Patriarch of Constantinople. So the Syrians, the Copts, all the communities, all the Miaphysite communities of the Ottoman Empire were subjected to the Armenian Patriarch. Now this is represented in Jerusalem up to the present day. Because, for example, the Syrian Orthodox don't have their own place of worship in the Church of the Holy Sepulchre, in the Church of Anastasis, but the Armenians are giving a little cave next to the Holy Sepulchre where the Syrian Orthodox can celebrate their Kurbana. And I have heard the stories how much they suffered from the Armenian patriarchs, and we know that the diverse Orthodox dioceses, because the patriarchates were abolished, suffered very much from the fanariots.
Yes.
It was all imperial politics, this time of the Ottoman Empire. So it is this, we have all these circumstances, but you might have understood that while I am Chalcedonian Orthodox and I am not communicating in the, unlike some of my fellow Orthodox, I am not, when I'm going to the, for example, the Syrian Orthodox churches, I feel extremely good because I feel the presence of God, but I'm not going to communions because we are not in church. I have seen Orthodox monks and people communicating without any problem. For me, it would be problematic. But so I am I'm on this side. I'm a Chalcedonian Orthodox. But I feel that in many respects, those churches the communities of those churches are ahead of us and are behaving in a more Christian way than we do generally, precisely because of the imperial heritage. Of course, I am very much grateful to my Malfono Mushekicek, who taught me not only Syriac, he taught me Christianity, and also Abuna Shimon of the of St. Mark's Monastery in Jerusalem, which has become my second home while I was in Jerusalem. And there is a very beautiful saying which I learned from Abuna Cicek. He was speaking about Syriac nationalist tendencies, because there is also a movement that they want in Mesopotamia a Syrian country like Israel for the Jews. And he was very much against it. And he said this beautiful sentence, which still resonates in my mind, Oto lan moto. Aito lan moto. The church is our homeland, not Mesopotamia, not any country, the church. And I think this is, not all the Oriental Orthodox feel like this, but they should, because this is one of the great achievements of Oriental Orthodoxy. They said goodbye to the secular power. They were always under some oppression and understood that it is the church which is their homeland. And I think the first step for us, so-called Eastern Orthodox, or Byzantine Orthodox, or Byzantine Slavic, but this is again not a good term, because we have the Romanians who are not Slavic, and we have the Hungarians who are not Slavic anymore, who have never been. We have the Georgians who have never been. So we have to can we understand this saying, Aito lan moto, the church is our homeland, and then we can speak to them as fellow Christians.
Yes.
Without deciding whether it's one church or several churches, because I can't decide. But these are martyr churches, and they are martyrized every day today. So I think, first of all, we have to receive them as our brothers and sisters. And after that, we can speak about theology. That will be a difficult issue, because we have anathematized each other's saints. And this is very difficult to be true. I don't know how it can be done.
Oh, anathemas can be lifted. I love what you're saying, because it's obvious, but it needs saying, and that is that reconciliation requires first the humanization of the other. It's very easy to hate somebody else in theory. It's very easy to speak horrible things about theoretical communities and persons. But when you meet them face to face, when you eat side by side with them, when you pray side by side with them, when you come to hear their stories, their hopes and fears, in short, as you say, Istvan, when you come to love them, then the dialogue can be transfigurative. It doesn't necessarily, love does not mean that you're going to agree on everything, but it means that at least your dialogue will be based on substance rather than on prejudice, racism, and other idols. So I completely agree with you that let us love one another, that with one mind we may confess. And, you know, when it comes to the theology, we're coming to the last few minutes of our hour together. I could spend
But
hours.
Peter, I see here questions which we have neglected.
Well, actually, one of the questions is one that I'm about to address, because a couple of the questions that I've noticed ask about the modern dialogue, the 20th century dialogue, and a couple of the questions say, you know, the churches in history have anathematized each other or have condemned each other, especially the Byzantine Church has condemned the other churches. And a question that is implicit in our questions today, and a question we hear all the time is, do we think we are smarter than the fathers who anathematized the others as heretics? And of course, this is not a crazy question to ask, because we do place our trust in the fathers and in the councils. These are our guiding authorities. But the point is that the fathers themselves were liable to change their terminology and to change their stance when it comes to specific persons when they came to learn more information. The period between the first council in Nicaea and the second council in Constantinople was a period of profound evolution of terminology. The words hypostasis and ousia came, which were originally synonymous, came to mean something different 6 decades later, and necessitated a change in the wording of the creed from 325 to 381. Persons who were received at Chalcedon, although as penitents, Theodoret and others, were then condemned at the next council. So the fathers themselves evolve in their understanding based on new information arising. And so ideally, what we're at least trying to do is imitate them. And on the basis of what we know now, with 1,500 years of additional history, additional study, additional lexicons, additional cultural understanding, to try to react to this new deposit of information, and away from the terrible heat of the relationships in the 5th, 6th, 7th centuries, we're able to perhaps get some new perspectives. So we're not smarter than the fathers. We're trying to be like the fathers in reacting to new information, new understanding, and of the same patristic and conciliar tradition. And that's been the basis of the modern dialogue, and that's the basis of our continued theological encounter. We're able to understand what Severus of Antioch taught in new ways now, through linguistic study and through other study. You know, we're able, if we want to reconsider the anathemas that have been placed on each other. So that's my little closing word that I think answers, or at least addresses, some of the questions.
Yeah, I have read the questions, and it's very difficult to answer them one by one. We should have started earlier, in fact. But there were questions about the irreconcilable dogmatic differences. For example, one of the questions raised the issue of opening the grave of Saint Euphemia, which and then she with her fingers showed that it's that she believes in the two natures of Christ. Now, this is very easy to answer. This is very easy to answer because the Miaphysites believe in two natures of Christ. The question, basically, Eutychus was condemned at Chalcedon, and none of the present Miaphysite churches is following it.
Dioscorus was not condemned at Chalcedon.
He was condemned for
disciplinary reasons.
Disciplinary issues.
Purely.
But if I know that it's very much at the end, but I wanted to show something.
Yes.
Just for finishing.
Yes.
Just a moment.
I have it. If you don't, I can share it.
No, I have it.
Okay.
I have it. So I am opening it and sharing it. Just very quickly.
We have 3 minutes, I'm afraid.
Okay, but just very, very quickly.
Sure.
I hope you can see it. From the beginning. So this is the monogenes hymn. This I am presenting not for a starting point for ecumenical dialogue, but for showing the inherent unity. This is the great Christological confession that we are singing, and we are basically singing the same hymn. It is attributed to Justinian, in the Emperor Justinian, in the Byzantine Orthodox Church, and to Severus of Antioch in the anti-Chalcedonian churches. And if you read, I have retranslated them just to use the same terminology. You see that it's basically the same hymn. The only difference is which is marked in bold, that our hymn, the Chalcedonian hymns, says the only begotten Son and Word of God who art immortal, and Severus, more Severus hymn says who in his nature is immortal. This is the only difference. Now, who is the author of this hymn? Most probably Severus of Antioch. And it was adopted with a little change by the Fifth Ecumenical Council, which did not condemn Theodoret. It condemned only those writings of Theodoret that he wrote against Saint Cyril. So Theodoret is blessed Theodoret of the Orthodox Church, with some of his writings condemned. Right. So what I think is that there is the Holy Spirit, and the Holy Spirit operates the union even without us being aware of it. And these are my final words.
That's a very, very beautiful way to end. If you could unshare your screen, we would come back. I so dearly appreciate that an overarching theme that you have insisted on since an hour ago up until the present moment is the theme of love and encounter as a priority, even as you have also prioritized church history and its meaning for the past and for the present. As always, at the close of an hour, one feels that so much more could be said, could have been said, must be said, but at least we make a beginning together, my brother, and I look forward already to our continued conversation, however it takes place. Thank you for this time. I feel awful saying goodbye, but we have come to that time.
Thank you so much, Peter. You have been a wonderful host.
On our way to another, perhaps even more stunning kind of a dialogue, which we're about to encounter for the next hour, I just want to emphasize that as the seminary, we are a seminary of the church, and therefore, however we are pro-dialogue, pro-union, anti-this, pro-that, we are ultimately servants of the church, and we don't go against what the church says and tells us. And our the head of our board of trustees is Metropolitan Tikhon. Our board of trustees contains bishops and clergy, and we are under their directorship. Ultimately, obviously, we are under the directorship of Christ himself. But what I'm trying to say is that we're not simply cowboys, and we're not simply acting impulsively. What we are doing is acting on the basis of our own best understanding of the church and its history. We are also doing this as persons who ground our lives in the worship of the church. That's one reason I'm so glad that Dr. Perczel ended the presentation with the Monogenes hymn at the very, very heart of our liturgy. All that we do is grounded in the liturgy. The sacred arts of the church are grounded in the liturgy, and they find their coherence in the liturgy.